The prairie in early spring carried a restless quiet, the kind of silence that spoke more of distance than of peace. Dust rose in faint spirals across the Osage Mission Trail, and every mile looked the same as the one before it. Before we go further into tonight's story, I need to be honest. My heart sank seeing that nearly 99% listen but never subscribe. If you value these voices from the past, please like and subscribe. That one click helps keep their stories alive. As we walk through this story together, share your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Travelers who passed through those empty stretches of Kansas in 1873 knew the dangers well enough. Sudden storms, wolves moving in silent packs, bands of men with no law but their own, and the loneliness that pressed hard on a person's mind. To disappear out there was not unusual. People vanished into the grasslands with regularity, and few were ever found again. But when Dr. William York rode out and never returned, the disappearance carried a different weight. He was not the type to wander aimlessly, not the kind to change his plans without notice. A physician, known in Fort Scott for his calm hand and steady practice, he lived by schedules and obligations. He had a family, patients who trusted his skill, and a reputation built over years of service. And he had a brother, Colonel Alexander York, a man hardened by war and politics, who carried influence across Kansas. When William vanished in March, those who knew him understood at once that something was wrong. His absence was not a matter of chance, but of danger. The last sighting of him was at a modest roadside and kept by a German family. Several travelers recalled seeing him there, seated at a wooden table, speaking animatedly with the daughter, Kate. The sun had dipped behind the horizon when he arrived, leaving him little choice but to stop for the night. His horse was fine and his bags full, his manner confident, his voice carrying the assurance of a man accustomed to being heard. He dined with his hosts, entertained their conversation, and then seemed to vanish into the dark. By morning, no one saw him leave, yet the family later claimed he had risen early and set out westward. Days passed, then weeks. His patients grew anxious, then despairing. Letters failed to reach him, and his absence could not be explained away by illness or misadventure. When his brother learned of the missing doctor, he rode down with investigators at his side, unwilling to let the prairie swallow another life without answer. The trail led straight to the inn, to the whitewashed house with its bright red roof standing solitary against the horizon. Neighbors had spoken of the place before, though never in tones of alarm. It was a resting point, a place of hot food and a roof, one of the few signs of welcome along a long, unforgiving road. But whispers had begun to drift now, tales of travelers who had passed that way and were never heard from again. The York name carried weight, and with it came attention the Bender family had not expected. People began to recall strange details, moments that had once seemed harmless but now pressed heavily on their minds. The way Kate asked too many questions about money and family. The way the younger John stared with empty eyes, muttering odd things about spirits. The way their orchard seemed always disturbed, soil freshly turned though no new trees had been planted. Colonel York pressed forward with the certainty of a man who had seen death in all its forms and knew the marks it left behind. His brother had not vanished into thin air. There was a place where his trail ended, and that place was here. The inn's door still swung open to visitors. The family still smiled their uneven smiles, and Kate still spoke of her powers to reach beyond the veil of death. She had even offered to summon William's spirit to ease the colonel's heart. But there was something in her eyes, something sharp and watchful, that betrayed more than comfort. The prairie had hidden many crimes, its vastness swallowing evidence, its silence muting the cries of the lost. But this disappearance was different, for the missing man had someone to search for him who would not stop, and the story of what was buried beneath those floorboards was waiting to be unearthed. For now, the inn stood quiet on the trail, its red roof a beacon to weary travelers, its hearth glowing with warmth, its hosts playing the part of kindness. But behind its walls, a darkness lived, patient and practiced, and it had claimed Dr. York as it had claimed others before him. The land itself seemed complicit, the wide fields holding their secrets too long. Neighbors told themselves he must have pressed on into the wilderness, that bandits had taken him, that wild animals had dragged him from his horse. Yet in their hearts they knew that such a man would not vanish so easily. He had walked into a place where charm and hospitality masked sharpened steel, where a woman's voice lured men to sit and stay, and where a family, bound not by love but by blood and secrecy, had perfected the art of making the living disappear. Thus began the unraveling, not with a shout or a confession, but with the silence left by one missing man. From that silence rose suspicion, then fear, and finally the relentless determination of a brother who would not be deceived. In the emptiness of the Kansas prairie, the stage was set. The actors had already played their parts for years, drawing strangers into their home with the promise of rest. But the curtain was only now beginning to lift on the truth, and what would be revealed would stain the very soil with its horror. The Bender family arrived in Kansas as quietly as a shadow at dusk. No one in Cherryvale could say for certain where they had come from. Only that one day the house appeared on the prairie, and with it the tall, heavy-shouldered man with the deep German accent, his stern wife who rarely spoke, their awkward son with the vacant stare, and the daughter who seemed too refined for such rough country. They bought 160 acres of land that sat square along the Osage Mission Trail, a stretch that every wagon, rider, and peddler knew well, for it was the main artery that carried life across the endless plains. The location was no accident. They had placed themselves at a stopping point that promised weary travelers food, rest, and the faint comfort of company in a land otherwise ruled by silence. John Bender, the father, worked the role of patriarch with an economy of words. He spoke little English and less kindly. His eyes were hard and his temper short, though most who met him did not linger long enough to test it. He spent his days tending the farm, splitting wood, and watching strangers with suspicion. His wife, Elvira, wore her distrust like a cloak. Her face was hard, her body stiff, her few words delivered in tones so cold that neighbors quickly learned to avoid conversation. They called her a witch in whispers, not out of fancy, but because there seemed no warmth in her, no hint of humanity beyond the heavy scowl that rarely left her features. The son, John Jr., stood tall like his father, but carried himself with the awkward shuffle of a man not fully at ease in his own skin. He would laugh at odd times, sometimes in the middle of church sermons, sometimes when others spoke of serious matters. His words stumbled, his jokes missed their mark, and behind his smile lay something unsettling. Some said he was slow, others thought he was touched by something darker. But he was strong, and his strength was put to use where words failed him. He worked the land, hauled the heavy loads, and followed orders with simple obedience. Then there was Kate. Unlike the rest, she seemed to belong not to the prairie but to another world entirely. She stood tall, almost 6 feet, with dark hair arranged in elaborate styles not seen in frontier towns, and eyes that drew people in with their sharpness. She spoke perfect English, smooth and measured, and carried herself with confidence uncommon for a young woman of her time. Where her family repelled, she attracted. She smiled, she listened, she leaned in close when others spoke. Men noticed her beauty, women noticed her assurance, and all noticed her ability to command attention in a room. Kate called herself a healer and a spiritualist. At a time when grief weighed heavy on the nation after the war, when families longed to hear from sons and husbands lost, her claims to speak with the dead carried power. She offered readings, whispered in trance-like voices, and let her listeners believe that she bridged the gap between this world and the next. For the lonely, the fearful, the grieving, it was a comfort too tempting to resist. And she charged nothing for kindness, only for the remedies and potions she mixed, or the longer sessions she offered to those willing to pay for answers the living could not provide. The house itself seemed ordinary to any who passed. A whitewashed frame of wood and stone, 2 stories high, a roof painted red so it stood out against the rolling grasslands. Inside, the front room served as a general store where travelers could buy flour, coffee, bullets, or tobacco. Behind a canvas curtain lay a dining area, plain but welcoming, where guests could sit for a meal or find lodging on rough beds for the night. To the untrained eye, It was like any other roadside inn. But beneath the planks of that rear room waited a cellar not spoken of, a hollow space that held secrets too foul for daylight. Neighbors saw the family as peculiar but useful. They sold goods, provided meals, and filled a need on the lonely trail. Few questioned their past. In a land where everyone was starting fresh, it was impolite to ask too much about what came before. Strangers arrived every season with stories no one checked. The Benders were no different, and if their manners were strange, well, the prairie was large enough for all sorts. Their orchard seemed to grow quickly, rows of young trees planted close together, the soil often turned. They said it was for fruit, and no one doubted. Farmers dig for their reasons, and it was not for others to interfere. It was Kate who gave the family their standing. While her parents glowered and her brother muttered, she charmed. She attended socials, spoke at community gatherings, and offered to teach about herbal cures and spiritual lessons. Men admired her, women respected her, and some whispered that she might one day marry into local prominence. She was the face of respectability, the smiling mask that hid the harshness of the others. Without her, the inn would have been avoided. With her, it became a place of interest. Travelers who might have ridden past found themselves curious, eager even, to meet the young woman who claimed to know the language of the dead. Beneath the polished surface, the family shared little warmth even with one another. Neighbors recalled meals at their table where no laughter passed between them, where even Kate's charm dimmed when no guests were present. They were bound together less by love than by some common secrecy, an understanding unspoken yet iron strong. In the eyes of outsiders, they were immigrants, hard-working and odd, trying to survive on the frontier. But to those who paid closer attention, there was something else, a silence too heavy, a stillness too sharp. The world of the Benders was one of two faces. To travelers, it offered light, food, and the soft voice of a young woman who promised glimpses of the unseen. To themselves, it was a fortress of concealment, a stage carefully set, each role played with purpose. The father's silence, the mother's glare, the son's eerie laughter, the daughter's captivating grace, each part balanced the other. And together, they created the illusion of a family making an honest living on the lonely Kansas road, while beneath that illusion lay the dark machinery of something altogether more sinister. Kate Bender knew how to listen. It was her gift, her trap, her weapon. When travelers stopped at the inn, weary from days of dust and solitude, they found her ready with a chair, a plate, and a pair of eyes that seemed to see more than what was spoken aloud. She leaned in with interest, her hands folded neatly, her voice calm and measured, and before long they were telling her more than they had told anyone on the trail. She asked about family, about wives and children waiting at home, about money owed or money carried, about plans for new beginnings farther west. She never asked directly, only let the questions come as though drawn from visions, as if the answers were part of some larger pattern only she could read. Spiritualism was the perfect disguise. The war had left countless families mourning. The prairie itself seemed haunted by absence, and people longed for connection with what was lost. Kate promised what no preacher or doctor could give. She told of spirits lingering near, of loved ones still watching, of signs hidden in the turn of cards or the lines of a palm. Her voice took on an otherworldly rhythm, sometimes soft as if distant, sometimes sharp as though possessed by another. Those who sat with her felt a shiver of belief even when doubt pressed at the edges. She did not need to prove her powers. The need of the living did that work for her. She spoke often of death not as an end, but as a passage. She told of souls freed from the weight of flesh, of a realm beyond suffering. When she leaned close and whispered that someone's husband had found peace, that a child was safe in heaven's care, tears would flow, and trust would settle like a binding knot. The grief-stricken saw her not as a stranger, but as a bridge, someone chosen by fate to guide them through the ache of the unknown. Few questioned her motives. Fewer still noticed the careful way she pressed for details about inheritance, about possessions carried, about journeys planned. Her beauty was part of the spell. On the frontier, where most women bent beneath years of labor and wind, Kate appeared untouched, her hair dark and glossy, her posture straight, her gown styled with flourishes that spoke of refinement. Men were drawn to her, not only by her looks, but by the confidence with which she moved through a world that often silenced women. She spoke openly, even boldly, about matters of spirit and flesh, and some whispered she was unfit for polite company. But the very boldness that unsettled the cautious made her irresistible to those who wanted to believe she possessed power beyond the ordinary. Even neighbors who distrusted her family found themselves caught by her presence. At gatherings, she spoke with eloquence about the mysteries of life and death, her words carrying a rhythm that held listeners still. She laughed when laughter was needed, wept when sorrow demanded, and seemed always to mirror exactly what others longed to feel. In her mirror, men and women alike saw reflections of hope, comfort, or secret desire. They saw what she chose for them to see. Behind her charm lay a colder mind. Kate understood the frailties of people, their hunger for meaning, their weakness before flattery, their eagerness to trust when comfort was offered. She used those frailties with precision. Her questions seemed innocent, yet each one marked another notch in the ledger she kept silently in her head. A man carrying gold sewn into his coat, a cattle buyer with a money belt, a widow with jewelry passed down from her mother. She gathered these facts as if they were whispered to her by spirits, when in truth they were handed over freely by those eager to be known. For Kate, deception was not only survival but art. She took pride in the theater of it, in the way she could command a room, turn suspicion aside, or lead a conversation exactly where she wanted it. Her family provided the muscle, the silence, the shelter of isolation. But she provided the mask. Without her, the inn would have been a place of dread. With her, it became a sanctuary where travelers let their guard fall, unaware that their every word was weaving their own doom. She blurred the line between belief and fraud so completely that even she seemed at times convinced of her visions. In her diaries, found years later, she wrote not of crimes, but of transitions, as if she were guiding souls rather than destroying bodies. She spoke of experiments, of testing the limits of spirit and flesh, of measuring how swiftly the soul might slip free under sudden violence. Whether she believed these things or only used them as excuses mattered little. The result was the same. Men and women came to her seeking peace, and they found only the silence of the cellar. What made Kate dangerous was not only her cunning but her patience. She could wait. She could let suspicion drift past like clouds across the prairie sky. If one guest seemed uncertain, she would disarm him with talk of visions or laughter. If a neighbor questioned her, she would invite them in, speak of herbs and remedies, and send them away reassured. She knew how to play the long game, how to build a reputation strong enough to shield the horrors beneath the boards. Her deception was not only outward but inward. She cloaked herself in the image of a healer, a seer, a woman set apart by fate. She believed, or convinced herself to believe, that she was offering mercy, that her victims passed quickly into peace. To the world she smiled and promised light. To herself she whispered of power and purpose. And in the quiet of her room, with the prairie wind pressing against the shutters, she wrote of death as though it were her truest companion. In this way Kate wove her web, each thread spun from charm, belief, and secrecy. She stood at the center, tall and poised, drawing the desperate and the curious into her orbit. And once caught, they rarely found their way out again. The dining room of the Bender Inn seemed harmless enough at first glance. A plain wooden table stretched near the canvas curtain, chairs worn by use, a lantern swinging from a beam, the smell of stewed meat and bread drifting through the space. Guests sat with their backs to the partition, grateful for a meal after the endless monotony of the trail. Kate would take her place across from them, her voice low, her eyes bright, her questions soft and inviting. She spoke of spirits, of futures, of messages carried on unseen currents. Her words drew men and women forward, leaning toward her as though caught in her spell. What none of them saw was the silent preparation unfolding around them. Behind the canvas, her brother moved quietly, waiting for the signal. The father lingered near the tools, his thick hands ready. The mother watched with her cold gaze, her silence a shroud that pressed over the room. Each knew their role, each step rehearsed until it carried the ease of habit. The house itself had been shaped into a machine of death, its pieces fitted not for comfort, but for precision. The table had been set directly above the hidden door. A hinge lay beneath the boards, worked smooth from use, silent as breath. Beneath it stretched the cellar, dark and damp, its walls soaked with what could never be washed away. The trapdoor was not for storage, not for fruit or grain, but for bodies. The arrangement was no accident. Every meal, every séance, every moment of charm was a performance designed to place the guest in the right position, their back to the curtain, their head bent forward, their attention fixed on Kate's eyes. When the moment came, it happened in silence. A nod, a glance, the faintest shift of Kate's hand upon the table. Then from behind the curtain, the blow fell. Heavy iron, wood thick with weight, the sound of bone giving way beneath force. A single strike, sometimes two, and the victims sagged forward, their last breath cut short before they had time to cry out. The chair tipped, the body slumped, and already the trapdoor was opening beneath them. Strong hands pulled them down into the waiting dark. The cellar floor bore the marks of years of such rituals. Grooves carved into stone from the dragging of heels, stains that spread in dark blossoms, patches where the earth never dried. Tools leaned in corners, mallets, hammers, knives honed to cruel sharpness. Ropes hung where bodies had been bound, pulleys fixed to beams where weight had been lifted. The air was heavy with iron, damp with rot, though the scent rarely drifted above thanks to careful sealing. Guests who ate in the room might smell only stew, only bread, only the faint smoke of the hearth. Above, Kate continued her part with unbroken poise. If the blow had not killed at once, she soothed with her voice, telling the victim not to fear, that the spirits waited, that peace was close. If neighbors gathered, if suspicion threatened, she turned the moment into performance, claiming visions of lost souls, inventing tales of bandits or Indians, anything to turn eyes away from the truth. Her family worked in rhythm with her words, their movements hidden by canvas and shadow, their violence cloaked by the sound of her speech. Bodies were buried in the orchard, the soil loosened and tamped down, the young trees planted above as cover. Neighbors saw rows of apple and peach, never suspecting that beneath the roots lay the remnants of those who had passed along the trail. The benders turned death into routine, the ritual into practice. Each grave dug in silence, each possession sorted and hidden, each disappearance explained by the wild dangers of the prairie. The trapdoor became the heart of their work, a threshold between two worlds. Above it, life continued, voices rose, laughter echoed, prayers were spoken. Below it, silence took hold, final and unbroken. The wood grew slick from years of blood seeping down, the hinges darkened, the boards warped. Yet still it opened smooth as ever, the design proving its purpose. The cellar did not cry out. It only received. The horror lay not only in the killings, but in the ease with which they were carried out. The family did not rush, did not stumble. They moved with calm certainty, each step tested, each motion repeated. It was a ritual, not an outburst. And like all rituals, it was marked by repetition, by familiarity, by the sense of something sacred inverted. To them it was not crime but craft, not madness but method. Those who vanished left behind no cries, no witnesses, no bodies on the road. They slipped into the earth beneath the trees, their absence noted only weeks or months later when letters failed to arrive or wagons did not appear at their destinations. The frontier swallowed them, as it had swallowed so many. Few would guess their last sight had been of a lantern swinging above a simple table, or that their final sound had been the calm voice of a woman promising visions of peace. The trapdoor stood at the center of it all, plain wood disguising a pit of shadows. Guests stepped across it without thought, their boots tapping on the boards, never knowing how thin the line was between safety and silence. Each knock of heel was another echo in the ledger Kate kept, another life measured against the promise of gain. And as the family moved through their roles, the prairie itself seemed to conspire, its wide stillness keeping secrets, its distance ensuring that no one came quickly enough to interrupt. In that room, under that roof, death was not sudden chaos but practiced ceremony. The family of four played their parts without falter, and the land absorbed the evidence. And so the ritual continued, one traveler after another, the table resetting each time as though nothing had happened, the lantern lit again, the curtain drawn back into place. Only the seller knew the truth, and the orchard that grew fat on the bodies buried beneath its roots. For years the Bender family thrived in silence, their secrets buried as neatly as the bodies beneath the orchard. But silence has its limits, and every deception frays with time. The prairie, though vast and patient, cannot hold all things forever. Suspicion grows in small ways first, in questions unasked, in faces that no longer appear at their destinations, in families left waiting for men who never return. Alone, each disappearance seemed like another tragedy of the trail. Together, they began to form a shadow too heavy to ignore. It was Dr. William York who became the thread that pulled the mask away. Unlike nameless settlers and wandering traders, he was known, respected, expected. His absence was not something that could be explained away by wolves or bandits. His brother, Colonel Alexander York, carried both influence and determination, and he would not rest until he had traced William's final steps. He followed the trail with discipline, each stop questioned, each account weighed. Again and again the path pointed back to the Bender Inn. The colonel's arrival unsettled the family's careful balance. Kate tried to play her part, welcoming him with the same warmth she had given to so many. She offered her services, spoke of visions, and insisted that William had traveled on. Her voice was steady, her eyes calm, but the colonel listened differently than other men. He was not charmed, nor was he distracted. He looked past the surface, weighing not only her words but the hesitation that clung to them. Behind his questions lay suspicion sharpened by grief, and suspicion is a fire that no charm can smother. Others began to recall their own unease. A neighbor remembered seeing the men digging late at night, lanterns swinging in the orchard. A merchant recalled waking to find Kate near his belongings, her excuse thin, her smile too quick. A farmer spoke of John Jr.'s strange talk of death, of ways to kill without being caught. These memories, once dismissed, returned now with weight. The pattern was forming, each story aligning with another, until the image could no longer be ignored. The community, too, began to stir. Rumors spread faster than horses, carrying whispers of evil at the inn. The charm that had shielded Kate for so long began to crack. Neighbors looked with new eyes, questioning the orchard, the curtained room, the family who seemed so different from all others. Fear gave way to anger. The prairie had room for hardship, but not for betrayal of the unspoken trust between travelers and hosts. As the pressure mounted, the Benders grew restless. The father grew harsher, his eyes darting, his silence heavier. The mother muttered more darkly, her suspicion no longer masked. The son laughed at strange hours, his unease breaking through in nervous bursts. And Kate, though she still held her composure, began to show strain. Her seances grew more desperate, her visions more wild, as though she believed she could talk her way past the rising storm. She spoke of curses, of spirits angry at suspicion, of doom that would fall upon those who doubted her. But her words no longer held the same power. People saw performance where once they had seen truth. The colonel pressed harder. He demanded a search, official and thorough. He gathered men who would not be swayed by charms or excuses. He carried the authority of law and the weight of a brother's grief. The date was set, the plan announced, the search to begin with dawn. For the Benders, the ritual was broken. The trapdoor that had swallowed so many could not swallow suspicion itself. The orchard that had concealed its secrets would soon be turned with shovels that dug for justice, not fruit. On the night before the search, the family vanished. No fire in the hearth, no voices in the house, no smoke rising from the chimney. Neighbors who passed at dawn found silence where once there had been activity. The horses were gone, the wagon tracks fresh, the house left in haste. Possessions remained, things of value abandoned, food left uneaten. It was flight, not departure. Panic, not plan. They had slipped into the dark like the very travelers they had once consumed, leaving behind the shell of a house that now stood as nothing but evidence. When the search party entered, they found not life, but remnants. The curtain hung still, the table stood ready, but the air carried something heavier than absence. The floor bore stains, the boards darkened in patches that rugs had tried to hide. The trapdoor revealed itself under prodding, its hinges smooth, its purpose undeniable. And beneath, the cellar opened its mouth, foul and damp, filled with the weight of years of violence. The smell was thick, the walls marked, the earth saturated. Here was the truth no words could disguise. Then came the orchard. The shovel struck soil that turned easily, softer than it should have been. The first body appeared, then another, then more. Each grave told a story of sudden betrayal, of wealth taken, of lives ended without warning. Among them lay Dr. York, the proof the colonel had sought, his body bearing the marks of blunt force, his fate sealed at the very table where Kate had spoken of peace. The orchard became a ledger of death, each tree rooted in secrets, each grave a testimony to the ritual above. The unraveling was complete. The mask had fallen, the house revealed, the orchard opened. Yet the family was gone, their flight as complete as their crimes had been hidden. The prairie that had sheltered their deception now gave cover to their escape. What remained was horror, anger, and the bitter knowledge that justice might never find them. The ritual was broken, but its shadow lingered, stretching far beyond the lonely inn, across the frontier itself, into the hearts of those who had once trusted strangers on the road. When the truth of the Bender house broke into daylight, it carried with it a silence that seemed deeper than the prairie itself. Neighbors stood at the edge of the cellar, their faces pale, their hands clenched on shovels and rifles, unable to speak of what they had found. The orchard stretched before them, its trees swaying gently in the wind, but beneath those roots lay stories of betrayal too dark to reconcile. 11 bodies were uncovered in the first days, each one placed carefully, each one stripped of possessions, each one abandoned to the earth as though human life were only another crop to be planted and forgotten. Word spread quickly. What began as a local horror soon filled columns of newspapers across the country. The Bloody Benders, they were called, their names stamped in ink from Kansas to New York. The story carried all the ingredients of a nightmare: an innocent inn, a family of immigrants, a daughter with hypnotic charm, a trapdoor leading to death, and a graveyard hidden beneath apple trees. Crowds gathered at the farm, gawking at the cellar, trampling the orchard, picking splinters from the floorboards as souvenirs. The inn became a shrine to terror, each visitor leaving with tales more gruesome than the last. Yet the family themselves were gone, vanished into the wide American landscape. Posse after posse set out, riders scouring trails, following wagon ruts across rivers and plains, but each lead ended in nothing. Some said the Benders fled north into the woods of Missouri. Others believed they had slipped south into Indian territory, vanishing among strangers who asked no questions. Still others swore vigilantes had caught them and carried out justice in secret, their bodies swinging from cottonwoods or left in shallow graves. No proof ever came, only whispers and rumors, each retelling adding another layer to the legend. Kate herself became the most haunting figure. Reports placed her everywhere, operating as a fortune teller in Denver, running a boarding house in Texas, appearing in San Francisco parlors as a medium. Each sighting spoke of a tall woman with piercing eyes and a voice that could bend men to her will. Whether these stories were true or only the product of fear mattered little. The idea of Kate Bender lived on, her shadow stretching across the frontier like a ghost who refused to be banished. She had promised she could speak with the dead, and in some way, she had kept that promise, for her name lingered long after her body was gone. The land where the inn once stood never truly healed. Farmers tilled the soil, planted corn and wheat, but harvests failed, and the earth gave back little. Some said it was cursed, poisoned by blood. Others said the ground itself remembered, that the roots of the orchard had drunk too deeply of suffering. Travelers passed more quickly along that stretch of road, unwilling to stop, glancing nervously at the empty horizon as though fearing the land might swallow them too. The case reshaped the way people thought about trust on the frontier. No longer was every door assumed to be safe. No longer was every innkeeper seen as a friend. Strangers carried suspicion now, and communities began to look more closely at those who lived on the edges. Lawmen pressed for better records. Families insisted on letters of introduction. Travelers banded together rather than venturing alone. The prairie had shown its teeth, and people learned to guard themselves against its hidden jaws. For the families of the lost, there was little comfort. Graves were dug, names carved into stone, prayers offered, but the killers walked free. Justice never came. What remained was a wound, a reminder that grief could be compounded by cruelty, that the world could take not only loved ones, but also the peace of knowing why. In that absence, the legend grew. The Bloody Benders were spoken of not only as criminals, but as specters, their story told by firelight, their house described in hushed voices, their trapdoor imagined in dreams that turned quickly to nightmares. What makes their story endure is not only the scale of their crimes, but the way they used trust as a weapon. Kate smiled and listened, offered comfort, spoke of unseen worlds, and in that moment of intimacy, she prepared the ground for betrayal. The others wielded hammers and dug graves, but it was her charm that drew the victims close. She blurred the line between healer and predator, between guide and destroyer. And in doing so, she revealed how easily the human hunger for hope can be twisted into a tool for harm. The Bender family slipped into history not with the clang of prison doors, but with the silence of disappearance. They left no trial, no confession, no punishment. Only absence. That absence became their legacy. For years afterward, whenever someone disappeared on the trail, whispers of the Benders returned. Whenever a woman with a commanding presence told fortunes in some far town, eyes widened and names were whispered. They were everywhere and nowhere, their reality bound up with myth, their crimes too terrible to vanish, their fate too elusive to be known. In the end, the Bender story is not only about murder. It is about how evil can wear the mask of kindness, how violence can be hidden in the plainest of places, how charm can conceal cruelty so deep it shakes the trust of an entire land. The inn stood for hospitality, the orchard for life, the seance for hope, and yet all of these became instruments of death. That is why the legend endures, why the name remains inked into American memory. Because it is not only a tale of bodies buried beneath trees, it is a warning of how thin the line can be between welcome and ruin. And so the Benders vanished into myth, perhaps swallowed by vigilante justice, perhaps hidden by distance, perhaps still moving through the world under other names. But their story lingered, retold in countless voices, each adding to the shadow they left behind. On the prairie wind their names still ride, a family who turned trust into betrayal, who made hospitality a snare, and who left the land itself marked by their passing. The inn is gone, the orchard plowed under, but the legend remains, as enduring as the wide Kansas sky and as haunting as the silence that fell over that house when its doors were opened and the truth came out.